Well, we're finally to Revelation 20, which is kind of an interesting chapter of the Bible that's caused a lot of controversy over the years and still does. And it's kind of important that we understand what is going on in Revelation chapter 20. We've studied the whole book of Revelation. We've looked at the beginning, 7 churches of Asia that it was written to, that these things would soon take place. We've talked about the seals. We've talked about the trumpets. We've talked about the bowls. We've talked about Rome. We've talked about how they persecuted Christians. We've talked about all these different things. We've talked about numbers. We've talked about what these different images in the book of Revelation means. We've talked about apocalyptic language. We've prepared ourselves, I hope, to look at this chapter of Revelation because things begin to change. The bowls have been poured out, haven't they? Judgment's been declared upon Rome. So what now? We got 3 chapters left, right? So what now? Well, now we have to talk about what's left. The beasts have been destroyed at the end of Revelation 19. The beasts are destroyed. First beast, second beast, they're gone. Harlot, gone. All that's taken care of. But there's still something left, right? And that's Satan. We got to deal with Satan. Now, in Revelation, which is somewhat different than the rest of the New Testament, Satan is referred to in that way, Satan. In most of the New Testament, we don't use his name, Satan. And I don't know, to be honest, I don't think that's his name. So, I don't know that we know his name. It's descriptive. Most of the Bible, we say diablos in the New Testament, which is where you get the word devil. Word means slanderer. Satan is a different word, satanos. Satan means adversary, one who stands against God or opposed to God. In the Old Testament, we talk about Satan. The New Testament, we say it's the devil. A little different. In the Old Testament, oftentimes we say Satan. Maybe we're not necessarily talking about the Satan we think of in the New Testament. Maybe we're just talking about one who stands opposed to God. When Jesus is having that conversation with Peter and he says, "Get behind me, Satan," he's not calling Peter Satan, okay? Even though translators often capitalize that. He's saying, "You who stand against me," okay? "Get behind me, you who are opposed. You are my adversary." In other words, you don't have your mind on God's things. Is he making a comparison to him and Satan? Absolutely. But is he calling him Satan? No, not really. But he's using that in a descriptive sense. In Revelation 20, we have to deal with Satan and what Christ did when it comes to Satan. But the biggest problem with Revelation 20 is not really Satan per se. It's this 1,000 years. And I think it really starts to define your view of Revelation as to how you view this particular passage of Scripture. And it's going to group you into one of 4 categories, okay? And you might not even really know those categories. It's going to place you as a premillennialist. I would predominantly say 3 categories. It's going to put you as a premillennialist. It's going to put you as a postmillennialist or a dispensationalist or an amillennialist, okay? And we've talked some about these terms, about what they mean and what they stand for. When I was a child, I grew up in the Baptist church, most of you know, and I spent a lot of time going door to door handing out these tracts that said, "Are you ready for the rapture?" Now, I don't think at 11 or 12 years old you really fully understand what that means, but nevertheless, I was my faithful little duty, and I walked around and handed out these things that said, "Are you ready for the rapture?" Didn't really know what the rapture was. Well, now I do. And sorry I handed those out, but, I was a kid, so what can I say? But, so what does it mean? Well, it has to do with how you view Christ. If you view Christ as an earthly king who came to reestablish Israel and Judah and to perform that and to be an earthly victor, then Jesus, when he came to this earth, did not do what he needed to do. It's that simple, really. It's that simple of a question. Because if he came to establish an earthly kingdom and to set up a rule from Jerusalem and to bring back Israel and Judah, which a lot of Old Testament prophecy speaks of that, if he came to do that, he didn't get that done, right? He failed. And if he did, then the idea is that he put something in place, the church, okay, until he comes again to do what he should have done the first time, which is to establish an earthly kingdom. That's the basic premise of premillennialism. We call it premillennialism because of 1,000 years. The 1,000 years, that's a millennial. There's a lot of other things that are involved in this process if you believe in premillennialism. Today, most people believe in a modified version of that that's called dispensationalism, okay? That's really what we see today in our world. Most denominations believe in dispensationalism. And dispensationalism really started in about 1840 by a man named Darby. And the man named Darby, he proposed this basic theory of dispensationalism, that we're in a dispensation of time, and there'll be another dispensation of time. We call it dispensationalism. And he did that, and a man by the name of Scofield, who wrote a study Bible, he jumped on that. And in his notes of a study Bible in Revelation, he laid out this idea of premillennialism, of dispensationalism. And at that time, not long after that, in the early 1900s, there was a really famous preacher in Chicago by the name of D.L. Moody. And D.L. Moody, he kind of jumped on that deal. And he was very popular guy. And preached all over the world, had crusades all over the world. A lot of the songs you sing in our songbook are because of D.L. Moody campaigns. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there. So let the lower lights be burning. That's a direct result of D.L. Moody campaigns. So he was very popular, and so this began to really take a firm root. But there was another factor behind it, and that was that for centuries, as we went through the Reformation, Revelation was seen and viewed basically as the Catholic Church. The harlot would be the Pope, Rome. The idea that the Catholicism was really what Revelation was about. The beast was the Catholic Church. That was a real popular view of Revelation. And that, of course, shed a really bad light on the Catholic Church. So there was a monk, and he's really the one who first started the idea and tried to shift the focus. So that's not about the Catholic Church, okay? It's about the end of time, and it's about this much bigger idea than just Catholicism. There was a lot of factors that drove the theology towards this idea of dispensationalism, but it's relatively, in the scope of history, it's relatively new. Now, some people believe in postmillennialism, which means that we're going to have a millennial reign and then we're going to have a second coming and a judgment. I'm an amillennialist. I believe we're in a symbolic millennium and that at the end of the age is the end of the age. And that's kind of what I preach when I talk about Revelation, a preterist view, that most of Revelation has been accomplished, okay? Millennialism is based on 1,000 years of Revelation 20. Dispensationalism, and Roy talked about this a little with me this morning, and it's a really popular view. It holds Israel and the church as two distinct entities, okay? In other words, Israel and the church are two distinct entities. Most Christians, a lot of Christians in the United States, believe this to be true. They believe Israel will still be saved, even though they're not Christians, because they're Israel. They hold them as two distinct entities in God's kingdom. In other words, Israel is one entity and the church is one entity. And that view, whether or not you know it, has driven U.S. foreign policy in Israel to a very large extent, especially in since about 1950. It's driven our foreign policy in Israel to a large extent. One reason we support Israel like we do is because of Christianity, because a lot of Christians believe and hold to be true to this day that Israel has to be reestablished and the temple has to be rebuilt in order for this prophecy to be fulfilled. And when the United States made Israel a nation again in 1948, it really it stoked the fire of dispensationalism. Israel's coming back. Israel's going to be a nation. Israel's going to rebuild the temple. Israel's going to come back. The sacrifice is going to start again. Hold them as two distinct things. Of course, you and I know, or we should know, that on the Temple Mount is the Dome of the Rock. If you ever see a picture of Jerusalem, that big gold dome mosque, that sits on the top of the Temple Mount. So in order for the temple to be rebuilt, that mosque is going to have to disappear. That's not going to happen very easily, I don't think. And the temple is going to have to be rebuilt. Judaism is going to have to be reestablished, and the sacrifice is going to have to start again. And we're going to talk about why that is a little bit. I'm going to try to go slow. I'm going to try to make this very complicated subject understandable. But dispensationalism holds Israel and the church as two distinct entities. A lot of people you talk to today, a lot of flyers that I get in the mail from religious organizations are about supporting Israel, okay? The 700 Club, Hagee, all of them are really big on that and really influenced a lot of our politics when it came to our Middle Eastern policy in dealing with Israel. So it's really a big thing that really affects you and I today. This really affects us today. So it's not something that you can kind of hold at a distance and say, well, what difference does this make? Because it does make a difference. It makes a difference in where Christians' money is going. It makes a difference in foreign policy. It makes a difference in a lot of different things. So it's really a big, big thing, maybe bigger than what you realize. The rapture has been predicted many times, right? You probably saw those bumper stickers that say, in case of rapture, this vehicle will be empty, right? Or you've read the Left Behind series maybe, or seen those things, Left Behind. The idea of what goes on. And the rapture has to do with premillennialism. And it's the idea that before judgment, and it really goes back to how you view premillennialism, but if you really take it in the view of, let me go back here a minute. If you really take a post-tribunal premillennialism or even a dispensation, the idea of dispensationalism, if you really look at that red line there, it kind of shows you a little bit about what I'm talking about. The idea is that we're in this time now between Christ coming, we're in that time, but before Christ comes again, when Christ comes again, there's going to be 7 years of tribulation, and that comes out of the 70 weeks of Daniel, and I'll try to show you that. There's going to be a tribulation. In this tribulation, whether you take that to be a post or a pre or a mid, because there's so many variations of this that I can't even tell you all of them. But the basic premise is that Christ is going to come and he's going to rapture all the righteous away from the earth. In other words, 1 Thessalonians 4 says that he's going to come and he's going to take us to be with him in the air, right? 1 Thessalonians 4. So the idea of the rapture is basically that Jesus is going to come again in the clouds of the air, that he's going to sound the trumpet, that the righteous dead and the righteous living will be taken to be with Jesus in the air. 1 Corinthians 15, right? We're all going to be changed, moment of twinkling of an eye. And when that happens, Jesus is going to come to earth. He's going to fight this battle of Armageddon. He's going to destroy all these wicked people. And there's going to be 7 years of tribulation, okay? 7 years of tribulation. And in this 7 years of tribulation, people are going to be born that don't know Jesus. So at the end of the 7 years of tribulation, there's going to be a period of time for them to repent, for them to turn to God. And at the end of that, that's the loosing of Satan, the 7 years of tribulation that we'll look at. And then Satan will be bound, be thrown to the lake of fire. Jesus will come and reign from earth and from Jerusalem for 1,000 years of peace and tranquility, and 1,000 years. And at the end of the 1,000 years, when he has this earthly kingdom reign for 1,000 years, at the end of a literal 1,000 years, which I don't know why we can take that 1,000 years to be literal and every other number in the book of Revelation is figurative, but at the end of that literal 1,000 years, then there'll be the final judgment, we call the Great White Throne Judgment of Revelation 21. So in order to have dispensationalism, you have to have multiple resurrections, multiple judgments. They take the sheep and goat judgment of Matthew to be a separate judgment from the great white throne judgment of Revelation. It's very, very, very confusing. I hope you understand. If you don't get anything else out of what I just said, I hope you get one thing. It's very confusing. Okay? so we can leave it at that, right? So that's kind of the idea of this 1,000 years that causes these problems, right? It has to do with Daniel. We're not going to get much further than Daniel tonight. This is going to take me a couple weeks. I'm sorry. I'm doing the best I can. Okay? So we're going to have to look at Daniel because the prophecy of Daniel is very, 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 very important to your view of the book of Revelation. I know that seems like that shouldn't be true, but it is. The 70 weeks of Daniel are just, Daniel's prophecy is just unbelievable, number one. Jesus came when Jesus came because of the 70 weeks of Daniel. Nobody disputes that. Jesus came to the earth when he came to the earth because of Daniel's 70 weeks. We'll talk about that. Very, very important prophecy in the Old Testament. And it has to do from Daniel 9. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people in your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah, the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Then after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. And the people of the Prince who is to come will destroy the city and sanctuary. And its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war, desolations are determined. He'll make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. Okay, that's confusing. So we'll try to break it down for you. Number one, it's not 70 literal weeks, 490 years. Okay? So it's 490 years. From when? From the issue of the decree to rebuild the temple. What does that mean? What that means is that the Babylonians in 486 BC destroyed the temple of Jerusalem. Jeremiah said, in 70 years, you're going to go back and rebuild it. Daniel said to the king, the time has come for us to do it, right? The Babylonian Empire didn't last that long. The Medes and Persians came in, the Medo-Persian Empire, we call it. There was a difference in those two kingdoms, okay? The Babylonians took everybody back to Babylon to make them Babylonians. We call that assimilation. Their idea was take all the people that are smart, all the people that are good, we'll take them back to Babylon, we're going to make them good little Babylonians, it's going to make our kingdom stronger, we're going to give them Babylonian names, we're going to teach them to worship Babylonian God, we're going to make them Babylonians. That's Daniel. Remember the book of Daniel? There were 3 guys. Remember those guys? They give them Babylonian names. Remember that? Meshach, right? Right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I'll get it in a minute. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were Babylonian names. There weren't their Israel names. And they said, you need to eat Babylonian food. You remember that? And Daniel said, oh, no, I want them to eat this food, and they'll be stronger and better. So they did. And then the king says, you need to bow down to our Babylonian God. Remember that? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego says, we won't bow down to your Babylonian God. And they got thrown into the fiery furnace. You remember all that? That was the Babylons. But it wasn't long before the Medes came in, swooped in. They swooped in. The Medes were so powerful that when they came into Babylon, instead of the Babylonians fighting the Medes, they just opened up the gates of Babylon and said, come on in. We ain't going to fight you because we can't win. Remember the book of Daniel when he saw the handwriting on the wall and it says you've been waiting to bounce and find warning and your kingdom will be taken from you to the Babylonian king, and the Medes come in and they took over the empire. Those are the days of Xerxes. Those are the days of Esther, okay? Babylonians, the Medes come in, they took it over, but the Medes were different than the Babylonians. The Babylonians wanted to assimilate everybody and make them Babylonians, okay? The Medes said, you want to go back? Go back. Right? If you want to go back to Jerusalem and be a Jew, go back and be a Jew. And they didn't just do that to Jews. They did it to everybody that the Babylonians had pulled in. They said, go back home. So that's the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, okay? So Ezra says, I'm going to go back. and I'm going to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And the king says, here's all the stuff we took out of the temple, all the articles, all the gold. Here's money, here's men, here's letters to get the timber you need. Go back to Jerusalem and rebuild your temple. What does Daniel say? He says, from the issue of the decree to rebuild the temple, it's going to be 490 years for all this to take place. 490 years, okay? But he says that's going to be divided, right? 70 weeks, okay? But that time's going to be divided. So the Jews knew, because of the prophecy of Daniel, they knew that in 62 weeks, 620 years, right, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, had to come. So when Jesus came in about 3 BC, actually, he came just at that right time to be the Messiah. There's no accident, you see. That's how good Daniel's prophecy is. Jesus came at just the right time in history to be the Messiah, according to the prophecy of Daniel, because they knew when the decree went out to rebuild the temple. That's how accurate Daniel's prophecy is. Daniel's prophecy is so accurate that some people who don't believe in the Bible think Daniel had to be written after the fact. They don't believe Daniel could be this accurate. So Daniel puts out this. So we're hinging what we're going to talk about on Daniel, okay? So we have the 70 weeks of Daniel. So we know that we have a division. We have 69 weeks, and then we have another week that's going to be divided in half. That's the simplest way I know to put it. So if you believe in dispensationalism or premillennialism, you have to deal with the 70 weeks of Daniel. Now, everybody agrees. I guess everybody never agrees on everything. 98% of people agree that Jesus came at the right time. That was the end of the 69 weeks. Everybody is good with that. The command to rebuild Jerusalem in Daniel 9:25, 7 weeks, then 62 weeks, the Messiah would be cut off, Jerusalem trampled, Daniel 9:26. Nobody has a problem to hear. But the 70th week is the problem. The 7th week, the last week, 7 years. So if you believe in premillennialism, you believe the 7 years is the tribulation, 7 years of tribulation. Now you and I, so basically the idea has to be, if you believe in premillennial dispensationalism, you have to have a big gap between those two time periods. In other words, you have 69 weeks, everybody agrees, that's Jesus. Everybody agrees with that. Nobody's got a problem with that. Everybody agrees with it. But then you got this last week where the sacrifice is going to end, according to Daniel, right? In 3.5 weeks, the sacrifice ends. And then in another 3.5 weeks, right, then basically that's the end of this time frame, the end of what Daniel says. We got to deal with that. Well, if you believe in premillennialism, you got to separate that, and they call that the church age. So they take the 69 weeks, and then they put a big gap that we're in right now, this big gap of history, the church age that you and I are in. And then when Jesus comes again, the rapture, that will start the 70th week of Daniel, okay? That's not going to start until Jesus comes again, and that's the rapture, and that's all these things are going to happen at that 70th week. That is the idea of premillennialism. I hope that somehow makes sense. I'm trying my best. I really, really am. I hope that kind of makes sense. So, what do we think? Well, in Acts 2:23, it says that Jesus Christ did exactly what he was supposed to do. That's the number one thing we have to remember. Jesus didn't fail. He did what he was supposed to do. He didn't come here to establish an earthly kingdom. If we believe that, then the whole premillennialism thing has to fall to the side, because premillennialism is based on one simple fact. Jesus failed, you have to have an earthly kingdom, and Jesus has got to come back and make that earthly kingdom. That's the whole premise. But Acts 2:23 says, this man delivered over the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men and put him to death. So Acts says that Jesus came according to the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God. In 1 Corinthians 15, it says, then comes the end, when he hands over the kingdom to the God and Father, when he has abolished all rule and all authority and all power. So Paul says in Corinthians, when Jesus comes again, it will be the end. He's going to hand the kingdom over, he's not going to start a kingdom. In Galatians 3, it says, if you belong to Christ, you Abraham's descendants and heirs according to the promise. The earthly kingdom believes physical Israel will be restored, and the temple will be rebuilt, and the sacrifice will resume. I know that's a lot to take in, and I probably need to stop. I was really trying to get to a couple more slides, but I probably need to stop. There's a lot to take in. It's hard for me. I hope you kind of understand. It's kind of hard to throw all that at somebody, I think. I think you need to understand the premise. There's two basic premises here, okay? You have to kind of make a decision in your mind. Number one, you have to decide, did Jesus do what he was meant to do when he came to earth? Is this what he meant to do? Did he mean to die on a cross? Did he mean to start the church? Was that his mission? Or was the mission of Jesus when he came to make an earthly kingdom and rule from Jerusalem? Now, if you think he came to make an earthly kingdom and rule from Jerusalem, he didn't get that done, okay? And if you think that's what the Old Testament prophecy means when it talks about Christ, then in order for it to be fulfilled, he has to come back and make that happen. That's as simple as I can make this. If you believe that Jesus Christ came and died on a cross as God intended for him to do to start the church, and you think he got that done, then there's no reason for him to come back and make a kingdom, and premillennialism has no basis at all. Doesn't work. That's really the simplest way I know to put it. Why do we struggle with this? Because I think a lot of people still want that. Israel still wants that. The Jews still want that. We have a hard time believing that Judaism, the Jews, Israel is no longer God's people, but they're not. And we'll look at scripture that says that they're not. That it's just now us. It's just now the church. That there's not two separate entities. And so I think some people want that. Some people want vindication from God. Some people want God to come and show the world that he's king and he's ruler and he's going to put everybody in their place. Some people desire that. And I think maybe that's what drives it. I really think the biggest thing that drives this doctrine today in our world is money. I really, really believe that. If you listen to Bot Radio, you listen to a lot of these evangelists, you listen to a lot of these guys, they're on there all the time. Send money. We're going to send money to Israel. Send money to Jerusalem. Send money to rebuild the temple. Send money to support them. Call your legislature. Support Israel. I really think that's what it comes down to. But you and I need to understand, we need to try to discern what God has to say about this. And I can't do that on one Sunday night. But try to remember what we kind of talked about, and next Sunday night, I'll try to maybe show you how I think this works, according to Daniel, and where I think we're at in this kingdom. So I'm going to quit because I'm past time, and I could literally go for 4 hours. So if there's anything we can do to help you this evening, let it be known while we stand.